Now, Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala and other distinguished guests are entering the hall. Please warmly welcome them with a big round of applause. Now, let us begin the trade talks with the WTO Director General. Today's forum will proceed in English. Those who need simultaneous interpretation in Korean, please use the receiver in front of you. Channel 1 is for Korean. First, we will begin with an opening speech by Woo Tae-hee, Executive Vice Chairman of KCCI. Please welcome him with a big round of applause.
Good afternoon, and thank you all for coming. On behalf of KCCI and Korean Business, I'd like to extend my sincere appreciation to Director General Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala. I'm also grateful to Trade Minister An, esteemed ambassadors, and Your Excellencies, and our panelists who have taken time out of busy schedule to be here today. Today's event is held in honor of Dr. Ngozi upon her visit to Korea. Dr. Ngozi is the 7th Director General of the WTO. She took office on March 1st, 2021, becoming the first woman and the African to take on the role of WTO Director General. Previously, Director General has served twice as Nigeria's finance minister and was the country's first female foreign minister. She also has a stirring 25 years career as an economist specializing in international development at the World Bank. The global landscape is evolving, transitioning from a technology-centric competition to a hegemonic one. The registration of the IRA may be an effort to tackle climate change, strive towards global carbon neutrality, and promote domestic industries. However, there are looming concerns that it may incite a surge in protectionism, thus leading to the erection of new trade barriers against the free trade. Moreover, the WTO, the foremost international organization advocating free trade, is also encountering a slew of challenges, such as reforming its appellate body and ratifying fisheries subsidies. These complex issues cannot be solved by the WTO in isolation or solely through the efforts of a single nation. Instead, they demand a collective response from multiple countries working together. Today, the Director General will present on the topic of redefining globalization. Korea is one of the WTO's strongest supporters, having contributed to its evolution from the GATT. We are deeply committed to working with the WTO to bolster free trade. In line with this, we sincerely look forward to hearing the insights of Director General today. Furthermore, we wish to utilize this opportunity to ponder together over strengthening the WTO and revitalizing the global economy. Once again, I express my heartfelt thanks for your attendance, and I hope this interaction with the Director General will prove insightful for our esteemed audiences. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your opening speech. Now, Mr. An Deok-keun, Minister for Trade from MOTI, will deliver a welcome address. Please welcome him with a big round of applause.
Good afternoon. I'm Deok-keun, Trade Minister of Korea. At the outset, I would like to extend my heartfelt appreciation to the World Trade Organization Director General, Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, for gracing us with her presence. I'm very much looking forward to your insightful lecture later today. My special thanks go to Executive Vice Chairman Woo Tae and staff member of the Korea Chamber of Commerce and Industry for organizing this wonderful event. I would also like to thank each and every one of you for your participation here today and making this event worthwhile. Distinguished guests, multilateral trading system is currently facing a number of immense difficulties. However, I'm convinced that the world will bear witness to the true value of the WTO during this challenging time. Having achieved rapid economic growth through free trade and open market, Korea is a steadfast advocate for a rule-based multilateral trading system. In this regard, Korea is determined to contribute responsibly toward the recovery efforts of the multilateral trade order based on the WTO. As a global pivotal state, Korea will continue to work closely together with the WTO members with a view to undertaking WTO reform, including the restoration of the dispute settlement system. In today's lecture, Dr. Ngozi will share her valuable insights on the global economic and trade environment, as well as ways to revitalize the multilateral trading system under the theme of Redefining Globalization, Korea's role in a changing world. I have no doubt that her speech today will inspire us to share our thought on changes in the global trade landscape and the future outlook of the WTO. With that said, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming WTO Director General Dr. Ngozi with a big round of applause.
Well, thank you very much for that generous introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for your patience. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm really delighted to be here, and I want to thank Minister An and the Korean government for this invitation. Seoul is perhaps the ideal place to think through the issues we'll be looking at today. The promise of globalization for growth, development, and human opportunity. The perils of a breakdown in global trade and the potential to foster resilience in international markets through greater diversification and deconcentration in where we produce goods and services. These are the issues I'll be touching on today in my talk about redefining globalization, Korea's role in a changing world. This city and this country embody the successes of global trade and the multilateral trading system over the past 75 years. Trade has been at the heart of the miracle on the Hangang. In 1953, the Republic of Korea emerged from a devastating war as one of Asia's poorest countries. Growth and exports began to pick up in the 1960s, but even in 1967, when Korea joined the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, per capita incomes were only about $160 in current US dollars. Exports that year were worth $321 million, and total trade was $1.3 billion. Manufactured goods were replacing primary products like dried seaweed, tungsten ore, and raw silk within Korea's export basket. But these manufactures were mostly textiles, clothing, footwear, and believe it or not, wigs. Turn the clock forward. Korea's goods trade has increased more than 1,000-fold to over $1.4 trillion in 2022. $1.4 trillion in 2022. Korea was the world's 5th largest merchandise exporter and its 6th largest importer. It's a leader in integrated circuits, the automotive sector, electronics, and shipbuilding. The traditionally dominant industrial conglomerates have been joined by tech platforms like Neva, which we visited today, Coupang, or innovative biopharmaceutical firms like Celltron. And I haven't even gotten to the remarkable success of the Korean wave of pop culture exports. From Gangnam Style to BTS, Parasite to Squid Game, Korea is the world's 10th largest exporter and importer of commercial services. According to data released earlier this year by the Ministry of Culture, Sports, and Tourism, exports of domestic cultural content in 2021 were worth $12.4 billion. While in dollar or won terms, this might seem like a fraction of the value of semiconductor exports, Hallyu is catalyzing revenue in other sectors, such as tourism, fashion, and even skincare, and it is generating considerable soft power for Korea. From the United States and Mexico to India, interest in learning Korean is growing rapidly. When the COVID-19 pandemic hit, Korea's strong response to it became another source of soft power, with many countries seeking to emulate its highly effective public health policies. Turning back to Korea's economic rise, it can be hard to get one's head around the sheer speed of its trajectory. When I was in elementary school in the early 1960s, Nigeria's per capita income was about the same as Korea's. Today, just about every electronic device my children and grandchildren use includes Korean components, even when it isn't branded Samsung or LG. Korea's emphasis on education and research and development were an important part of this story. At 4.8% of GDP, Korea devotes a higher share of output to R&D than almost any country. Complementing this, another essential element in making the Korean growth miracle possible was the stable and predictable and open multilateral trading system underpinned by the GATT-WTO system. That's the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade and the WTO system. Korean businesses, chaebols or smaller businesses, were able to ramp up export-oriented investment and be reasonably confident that major foreign markets would not slam the door shut on their products. In the classic formulation about trade-led growth, they were able to import what the world knew and export what it wanted. Trade is a means to an end, and that end is better lives and livelihoods for people. For Koreans, increased trade has gone hand in hand with greater prosperity. Per capita incomes in 2021 surpassed 35,000 current US dollars in the mid-1990s. 35,000 current US dollars. In the mid-1990s, per capita incomes in Korea were 30% below the OECD average, but they've made up the gap and they've converged. I don't want to make it sound like there are no problems here. The country's demographic challenges are well known. Korea's total fertility rate is declining rapidly and currently stands at 0.78 children born per woman in 2022. Some estimate that if the current trends continue, Korea's population will shrink to approximately 28 million people by the end of the 21st century, from the current 51 million. The strong focus on education that was a key factor in Korea's ascent has more recently given rise to perceptions about over-education and frustration about mismatches between skills and labor market opportunities. Despite significant progress, gender gaps in the economy remain wide. And as I will come back to shortly, serious economic challenges are visible on the horizon that go beyond the current slowdown in GDP growth here and elsewhere. Nevertheless, Korea's achievements are undeniable and an inspiration to other developing economies. Koreans worked hard and made sacrifices for these successes. I worked briefly on Korea when I was at the World Bank, and I was working at the World Bank when the Asian financial crisis hit in 1997. I still remember reading about ordinary Koreans making sacrifices, coming forward to donate gold, jewelry, coins, and medals to help their government pay back an emergency loan from the IMF. Back in 1997, integration into global capital flows, particularly on the part of over-indebted conglomerates, became a source of vulnerability for Korea. Integration into global trade, meanwhile, was a source of resilience. A boom in exports helped drive Korea's rapid recovery from the crisis. But while the open global economy embedded in the multilateral trading system and the WTO has played a critical role in enabling Korea's economic success, the world is changing, and the external environment is becoming less benign. Rising geopolitical tensions between the world's two largest economies, China and the United States, are straining support for open trade and putting pressure on the WTO. In several instances, governments have unfortunately weaponized trade relations in response to strategic rivalries or diplomatic disagreements. Other dimensions of the current global crisis, in particular the COVID-19 pandemic, the war in Ukraine, climate change, have exposed genuine vulnerabilities in the way global trade is organized. Factory shutdowns, production shortages, and supply bottlenecks have fueled an alternative narrative about globalization, one that sees the risks of integration as exceeding the benefits. This new mantra calls for more production to be reshored or friendshored, distributed across a handful of friendly nations. These changes are cause for concern everywhere, but perhaps especially so in a country like Korea. This country has a profound stake in the world economy and the global trading system, and in a WTO that works, not just because of trade's importance to its economic success, but because, like many other countries, Korea imports over half of its food. Its grain self-sufficiency is 20%, making it one of the lowest among the OECD countries, raising concerns also about food security. The talk of decoupling and deglobalization raises questions for Korean policymakers and businesses. How can the country keep its rise? How can it keep its hard and soft power to make more friends in the world? Let me devote my remaining remarks to offering one potential path forward. A reassuring sign amid all the rhetoric around trade is that so far at least, the data provide little indication of a widespread retreat from trade. Global merchandise trade was at record levels in 2022. Despite the geopolitical frictions, China-US trade was at an all-time high of $691 billion in 2022, according to the US Commerce Department data. Goods trade between Korea and China has also been at near all-time highs at about $310 billion in 2022, according to Korean data. That said, a growing array of industrial policy measures in different countries are seeking to redirect investment towards reshoring or friendshoring, and this could influence future trade patterns. Some reshoring or nearshoring looks inevitable in a handful of sectors, but we should be careful not to go further than that for at least 3 reasons. First, for practical considerations. Shallower, less diversified supply chains would actually be less resilient to localized shocks, such as from extreme weather event or a disease outbreak. Reshoring in pursuit of resilience could end up backfiring. Second, because deglobalization would come at enormous economic cost. WTO researchers estimate that if the world economy splits into 2 separate trading blocks, it would reduce long-term real GDP by at least 5% on average from the current trend. Imagine losing the whole of Japan from the world economy. That's what we are talking about. Many low-income countries would endure double-digit real income losses, dealing a major blow to their development prospects. And third, because we still need international cooperation to meet the challenge of the global commons of our time, which are many, from climate change to preparing for the next potential pandemic. In our view, the fundamental problem in global trade is not supply vulnerabilities associated with economic interdependence per se. Trade rebounded strongly from the pandemic lockdowns. Open markets and supply chains helped manufacture medical supplies and eventually vaccines in vast quantities and move them around the world. Most product shortages proved temporary. After the war in Ukraine disrupted global farm trade, countries like Ethiopia were able to source grain from new markets. European Union was able to source energy, gas, from markets other than Russia. So trade has been more of a shock absorber than a shock transmitter. Trade has helped build resilience. There is, however, a deeper underlying problem for supply vulnerability, and that is over-concentration in some trading relationships for certain vital products. In light of this, the way to make supply chains more robust and resilient is to deconcentrate them, to make them deeper and more diversified, by using them to bring countries and communities that were at the margins of the globalization process into the mainstream. This is what we are calling re-globalization at the WTO. We know that not every country benefited from globalization. Some poor countries were left behind. We know that within rich countries, there were poor people who were left behind. The question is, do we now have an opportunity to use the need to build resilience in the world to kill two birds with one stone? One is to diversify and deconcentrate our supply chains, putting them in those countries that were left at the margins where the business environment permits. So when we talk of diversifying supply chains, we are not talking of China plus one, which is what we usually hear, which means China plus Indonesia, or China plus India, or China plus Vietnam. And I always ask, how about China plus Bangladesh? How about China plus Morocco? How about China plus Nigeria? We have to think of diversification, China plus Brazil. So this is what we mean that we can kill two birds with one stone through this instrument of re-globalization. Re-globalization offers a route to continue trade and interdependence, while at the same time making trade harder to weaponize. In addition, it would help other countries follow Korea's lead and use integration into international trade and investment to drive growth, development, and poverty reduction. In fact, the need to build resilience in supply networks can be seen as an opportunity for Korea itself, particularly as an aging population and shrinking workforce begin to weigh on future growth prospects. There are parts of the world where Korean products are present and well regarded, but Korea itself is not, at least not as significantly as one would wish. For instance, Korea has many free trade agreements in Latin America with Peru, with Colombia, Central American countries, but it has none with Africa. But I'm delighted to hear about the approaches that are being made to deepen the economic relationship with the African continent. Deepening economic integration with Africa, with its young and growing population, would enhance Korea's access both to markets and to the workforce of the future. I think there's considerable scope. Korea's exports to Africa have been basically flat for a decade, worth about $14.2 billion in 2012 and $13.8 billion in 2022, with some up and down movement in between. However, for Africa, trade with Korea has actually been declining when compared with trade to the rest of the world. In 2011, 0.9% of African exports went to Korea. After peaking at 1.6% in 2014, that share had declined to 0.6% by 2021. Korea accounted for 2.2% of the continent's goods import in 2011, but only 1.2% as of 2021. And we see something similar with regard to foreign direct investment, where Korea's investment in Africa has grown much more slowly than its outward investment elsewhere. As of 2020, the $2.9 billion in Korean direct investment in Africa represented only 0.6% of the stock of Korea's outward bound FDI. So this is an area where we see opportunity. It's an area where some of the businesses here could be more daring. Korean firms have made major successful investments in South and Southeast Asia. This is re-globalization in action. It can and must be extended to other parts of the world, as I said. There's plenty of opportunity in Latin America, Central Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. Decentralizing supply chain activity in sectors like electronics, automobiles, technology to these regions would come with some risks, yes, and some difficulties. But the potential rewards are substantial. Re-globalization cannot happen without a strong and effective multilateral trading system. That is one reason why I so appreciate Korea for its active engagement at the WTO. Korea was a key player in the success of our 12th Ministerial Conference last June, when WTO members, all 164 of them, including China and the US, Russia and Ukraine, all worked across geopolitical and substantive differences to deliver agreements on fisheries subsidies, on food security, and on pandemic response, whilst launching a process of institutional reform for the WTO. In doing so, they demonstrated that multilateral reform of the trading system is not just necessary, but it's possible. At our 13th Ministerial Conference in Abu Dhabi next February, we need to take the next steps towards keeping forward to keep the WTO fit for purpose for the 21st century world economy. We need Korea to keep pressing its fellow members for reform. And I want to take a moment to salute Trade Minister An for his outreach to the US on this critical issue of making our dispute settlement system fully functional again. I know that the dispute settlement system matters for the business community, and we are committed to its reform and its full functionality. I want to say that in my meeting since I've been here, since yesterday, I've received the full assurance of the Korean government's backing, including the Prime Minister and the President, on the support for this reform. We need Korea to keep pressing forward the way it's doing at the WTO, working with other members to get this system fit for the 21st century. Korea's delegation is involved in several ongoing processes at the WTO that would directly support re-globalization in particular. They're involved in talks on investment facilitation, which they are coordinating. They are involved in the accession of other countries like Uzbekistan who want to join the WTO. They are also involved in the new Services Domestic Regulation Agreement, and Korea is one of nearly 90 participants in ongoing e-commerce negotiations that seek to establish some basic global rules for digital trade. We believe that the future of trade is services, and the future of trade is digital. And clearer rules in these areas would help lower barriers to entry into international markets for developing countries, particularly when it comes to fast-growing trade in services delivered over digital networks. The future of trade is also green and inclusive, and Korea is among the large numbers of WTO members seeking to make trade a stronger force for environmental sustainability and for empowering women and small businesses. Advancing all these processes will be an important part of our work between now and MC13 next February. Korea's support will be critical. And it's a great pleasure to me to see the enthusiasm with which Korea does its work at the WTO. Before closing, let me sum up my message for Korean businesses. Reach out to non-traditional trade and investment partners. Try areas for investment that you have not tried before. Deconcentrate your supply chains into countries where the business environment is fitting, but which may not be the normal areas you would think of going to. Look on what is happening now as an opportunity, not as a crisis. And keep supporting the multilateral trading system, because that underpins all the work you will do with trade integration and with diversification of supply chains. Thank you very much.
Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, thank you very much for your excellent lecture. Dr. Ngozi, please take your seat for the panel discussion. We will begin the panel discussion shortly. Panelists participating in the discussion, please follow the MC's guidance and proceed to the stage accordingly. Okay, it seems we are ready. I'm really looking forward to this discussion. Now, Woo Tae-hee, Executive Vice Chairman of KCCI, will lead the panel discussion. Mr. Executive Vice Chairman, please proceed.
Okay, once again, Dr. Ngozi, welcome to KCCI, and thank you so much for your forward-looking and insightful speech. I think today we are joined by more than 200 participants, and I'm sure that your lecture will contribute to drawing more attention and also more support for Korea for the WTO. Now, let me move to our panel discussion today. We have panelists from the business fields and also academia. Let me introduce first to the right side, Professor Jae-min Lee of SNU, and Mr. A little bit of applause will be very fine. Thank you very much. And Mr. Kim Jong-il, Executive Vice President of SK Group. And to left is Mr. Kyung-han Kim, from Senior Executive Vice President of POSCO. And also Professor Hyo-young Lee of National Diplomatic Academy. Thank you for coming. We are a little bit behind time, so I'd like to ask each panelist to speak about for 5 minutes, and then Dr. Ngozi will make a summary and some of the response. Maybe if we have some time, we might have 1 or 2 questions from the floor. So that's my plan for this panel discussion. So I'd like to ask Professor Lee first to talk about the protectionism and the recent development of the U.S. and China conflicts. Please, floor is yours.
Thank you. 고맙습니다. Thank you very much, Vice Chairman Woo. I would like to thank KCCI and MOTI for organizing this event. It is a great honor to meet with Director General Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala and directly hear from her the current status of multilateralism, MC12, MC13, and particularly the role Korea is playing in many fronts of the current trade issues in many parts of the WTO's work. I think the Madam Director General underscored Korea's role, particularly in the fisheries subsidies agreement, which is very important achievement of MC12, and investment facilitation framework, which seems to be an important achievement for MC13 next February in Abu Dhabi, and most notably the difficult task of reforming the dispute settlement mechanism at the WTO, where Korea is also actively working with the WTO and other members to find a workable solution for the future. So in many places, Korea is working hard. And I believe last year and this year will be an important turning point for the WTO under the leadership of the Madam Director General and the future of the multilateral trading regime. I think her speech about 5 minutes ago gave us a nice overview of where we stand and where we are heading and what role the WTO will be playing for the future of multilateralism and what Korea can do in this whole endeavor. I particularly realized the point that Madam Director General mentioned, where Korea can do more and better in expanding its relationship with other countries, such as Korea, African continent, the cooperation and the coordination in these trade works and projects for the future. So in many places, her remarks underscored the importance of Korea's role and the importance of multilateralism. For the interest of brevity, I just would like to have some quick comments and questions for Madam Director General. I think she pointed out the difficult task that we are facing these days, the confrontation or tension between the two largest members of the WTO, and many countries are caught in the middle. Korea is one of the best examples of struggling in this difficult situation, and we have seen the novel attempts, if I could put it that way, novel attempts to take advantage of many trade issues in a way that can advance strategic interest and the diplomatic interest and other interests of certain members. So in that respect, we have seen many new legislations which are very good if you look at the surface of the measures. It could be environmental measures, could be the digital economy measures, or it could be some other the legitimate governmental purpose objective measures, but sometimes those measures are applied in a way that can place disproportionate burden on certain members of that sector. So I'm just wondering how the WTO is looking at these situations in key economies of the world, and how the WTO is perceiving this new development in key countries in this sector. So that is one question I'd like to ask Madam Director General. For instance, we have seen some legislations in the United States, legislations in the European Union. I will not put a specific names of the legislations, but we have seen many new legislations, and those new legislations raise concern over the current strength and future direction of the multilateralism. So if we redesign and if we aim for, to borrow her words, if we aim for re-globalization of the multilateralism, how do we have to see these legislative developments in key members? How do we see those developments? That is one question I would like to pose, Madam Director General. And finally, my second question for her is what we can expect from MC13. MC12, we have achieved fisheries subsidies agreement, and for MC13, what achievement we should expect in terms of revitalizing multilateralism from here going forward. Again, it's a great honor to hear from her directly, and we'll continue to discuss these issues with her and WTO colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Lee is asking very nicely, but very tough questions. So I will give you some moment to contemplate. Meanwhile, I'd like to ask Kim Jong-il, SK, about the reshuffling of global value chain and what you think about deglobalization from the corporate side of the view. Please.
Thank you, Vice Chairman Woo. My name is Kim Jong-il and I work for SK, which is the second largest conglomerate in Korea. I remember you mentioned it, Samsung and LG, but not SK. So. Our business portfolio covers semiconductor, bio, pharmaceuticals, ICT and telecommunication, and green energies too. And it is also my great honor and pleasure to have you here in Seoul and to have an opportunity to discuss the present and the future of the WTO. WTO has been a guardian of the global free trade. And WTO also has contributed to increase the global economic prosperity. And then it is very difficult to deny that Korea is one of the countries who benefited most from the WTO and GATT system. Korea is the only country who transformed itself from beneficiary to donor country. However, as all of us will agree, the status and responsibilities of WTO has been threatened by some significant geopolitical and public health related events. Among them is US-China trade conflicts, as Professor Lee mentioned, and a pandemic which was incurred by the COVID-19 back in 2020 will be another. And also the Russia-Ukraine war, which is lasting until today, will be another important event. As a result, the global value chain is undergoing a tremendous change. It is now being fragmented and is now being reshuffled. Many countries are trying to announce, their own, industrial policies, which is involved with very controversial subsidies and trade restrictions. And protectionism is arising every corner of the world. And as a result, many countries are requested to choose in which value chain they should do businesses. So in short, era of efficiency is gone and the era of security is approaching. From the standpoint of the businesses, this is not an easy time to survive. I understand every company in the world is contemplating on its own survival strategies. Having a separate production, sourcing, and distribution, and sales and marketing assets in every different country or region is a tough job for any company. First of all, it will incur the increase of the associated cost, and moreover, the level of the uncertainties will go up too. And we all agree that the uncertainties are what we hate most in the businesses. And lastly, the worries over oversupply for key products is escalating. As long as many countries stick to having their own production facilities in their own territories, oversupplies for key products will be inevitable. If oversupply is realized, that will give a very negative impact on the profitability and the IRR of the investment. Now, so global businesses are turning their eyes to WTO. We expect WTO to exercise the leadership that it has done in the past. We all agree that it is not a simple and easy task to be managed or tackled by a single institute like WTO. However, at least we expect and hope WTO to play a pivotal role to resolve these difficult issues and restore the confidence of the businesses. Madam Director General, I'll be very happy to hear your opinions on these issues. Thank you very much.
Okay, another tough question again. So what he's using a very difficult jargon, but what he's saying is that Korean firms are caught in the crossfire between China and US. And what can WTO do for Korean firms? That's all he asks. Shall I have one more to continue with these questions? Okay. Okay. Mr. Kim from POSCO.
Thank you, your chairman. Your Excellency, Dr. Ngozi, I'm very feel honored today to be here with you as a panelist. I do not want to blame you not to mention POSCO like SK, but just a steel company all the time cause the dilemma and headache in the global trade. And I first expressed my very impressed mind on your statement in particular. You are talking about that trade will help resilience in the process of economic recovery after COVID pandemic. This word gives me very clear insight how the business society will address this situation. Also, the concept of re-globalization giving me new vision, what we should do after COVID pandemic. Thank you for your kind insight. I do believe that WTO has a central role in maintaining free and fair trade in the global market. Also, WTO helps small and medium-sized economy to raise their concern to the public and for the global attention. Thus, I express my sincere respect your leadership in designing and re-globalizing the world trade. Today, I want to limit my comment on the trade of steel. Already the steel industry face very divergent trade restrictive measures, including anti-dumping and countervailing measures, among others. Nearly half of the trade restrictive measures, trade remedy measures, targeting steel product, we are completely penalized. Thus, there is some growing concern among steel industry that trade measures against steel products are used as disguised trade restrictive tools. In this area, we are asking the role of the WTO to address and resolve these concerns. Recently, WTO panel determined that Section 232 measure on steel and aluminum taken by one big powers is not consistent with the WTO agreement. This determination is not implemented until today. It causes frustration among steel industry. If WTO does not work, how or what should we do in resolving the current trade barriers caused by the major trade blocs? Second point, as I want to ask your kind attention, is your carbon measures. The steel industry fully recognize our responsibility to reach carbon neutrality by 2050 in accordance with the Paris Agreement. POSCO, the first Asian steelmaker making concrete commitment to reach carbon neutrality by 2050. We are now doing our best, every effort to implement our commitment. However, there are some growing concerns among our steel industry that some carbon measures taken by some WTO members would be used as a tool to build up, raise a trade barrier against steel products from other countries. In this respect, I express my sincere thanks to your Dr. Ngozi to host International Trade Forum this March and addressing these matters and as collecting the view or opinion or concern raised by the private sector. I'm personally very happy to attend that forum as a panelist at the time. Also, I do believe that this forum provided the great opportunity to collect, exchange, view among not only from the private sector, but also international organs, how to address these matters. I hope your leadership should continue to find out the solution on these matters. Also, there are also some growing concern on the individual measures on carbon issue taken by some members. One of the ideal examples is CBAM, taken by the European Union. I do not want to raise the question of legality of CBAM measures in line with the WTO agreement, but we are finding out some discrimination between CBAM and EU ETS in the area, the methodology to calculate the carbon emission, the monitoring requirement or verification procedure, the transaction of ETS certification. We do believe that this kind of discrimination will cause a severe barrier among trade with the trading among steel producers. Also, recently, United States and the European Union now discussing GSSA, Global Arrangement on Sustainable Steel and Aluminum. We do not know the content because it's a process of negotiation not to disclose to the public sector. However, as a major stakeholders, steel industry now reserve a very strong concern on these measures. Thus, I do believe that carbon measure is not only the matter of the environmental issue. Carbon measures are very closely linked to the trade. We are asking WTO should address this matter in terms and in the context of a WTO agreement. Also, if it is required, WTO should address or should think about designing new regulation to address those new issues like environmental or other area. So we are asking your kind of support. Please, also we are asking your kind of understanding on our concern. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you. So, some applause, please. Maybe. Thank you, Mr. Kim, for telling us about the difficulties that our Korean steel companies are facing. Next, I'd like to ask Professor Lee Hyo-young, telling about the dispute settlement problems. Please.
Thank you very much, first of all, for inviting me to this very prestigious event. It's actually a great honor for me to be a part of this panel, especially with Madam Director General Ngozi. It's very nice to meet you in person. I've been designated a question on the WTO dispute settlement system, but I'm actually interested more in national security issues, but I will ask the question as designated. Well, first of all, I'm Hyo-young Lee, professor at the Korean National Diplomatic Academy, and I'm teaching and doing research on international trade policy, and it's a great honor to be with you today. Well, as you all know, WTO reform is a top priority agenda that we need to make progress on before the next ministerial conference. And currently, we all know very well that both the judicial function and the legislative function of the WTO is not working properly, obviously for reasons that we know very well. The inherent structural problem of decision-making in the WTO is not working, and there are also external geopolitical tensions that have made the WTO dispute settlement system not able to work properly. Although we know that it would be best to revive the WTO system as a whole, we know that this is actually not a feasible option, at least not for the time being. Therefore, we may need to pursue more interim phased alternative approaches in the meantime. First of all, in the area of the legislative function of the WTO, or for making new trade rules that better reflect the realities of the current trade environment, we may need to focus our efforts on the plurilateral approach for achieving agreement on new trade rules. As we have experienced from MC12, the multilateral negotiations may only be effective to achieve consensus on issues that involve global public goods, such as fisheries subsidies or COVID-19 vaccines and food security issues, that actually require a truly multilateral approach to solve these issues, because these are global public problems. However, it is also very imperative that we need to solve issues that are more contentious, like the subsidies issues or the trade remedies issues, as Mr. Park has just mentioned, or the services issues that actually are not very regulated under the WTO. And of course, we need to deal with digital trade issues as well, because it's a very new area of trade. And we may need to make progress on new trade rules, therefore, we may need to take an alternative plurilateral approach, such as a JSI on e-commerce. However, before we proceed further, I think that we also need to consider the need to look into the proposed rules from a more inclusive approach, perspective, such as taking into account the importance of technology security for advanced technology, or for introducing fair competition in the digital market, which are all issues that are being introduced newly in the digital area. Because digital transformation has indeed had a significant impact on our trade environment, and we need new trade rules. However, at the same time, we need to be more considerate of the issues of safety, in security, in data transfer, and technology transfer, in order to make the rules more relevant for the entire WTO membership, not only for a few leading companies. And as for the judicial aspect of the WTO, we have 26 WTO members that are taking part in the MPIA, which I think you know very well, the Multi-Party Interim Appeal Arbitration Arrangement, which is an interim alternative mechanism for making the dispute settlement work. And recently, we've heard news that Japan has joined the MPIA. Basically, I guess, reportedly for reasons related to a pending dispute case involving China. However, the US has not joined the MPIA yet, and is continuing actually to appeal cases into the void, such as the Section 232 case involving steel imports, as POSCO may know very well. And as you know very well, such actions are making the WTO system more ineffective, and unfortunately undermining the relevance and the legitimacy of the multilateral system as a whole. Therefore, I think that we need to act very quickly if we want to avoid this kind of situation, and before the multilateral trading system becomes an irrelevant multilateral organization like other organizations, international organizations. So my question is, Madam Director General Ngozi, may I ask you about your prospects on the MPIA? Especially with the US still not joining? Or do you think there are any other better alternatives to make the WTO system work? Because in your speech, you mentioned that the WTO is committed to the WTO dispute settlement reforms. And I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more on what kind of concrete options you're thinking about. Some other options that we could think about is we could consider make the WTO into a WDSB into a single panel process, because instead of maintaining the two-tiered system with the appellate body no longer working and with no signs of being resumed in the time being. So we could increase the number of panels to include more legal experts, so that the panel decisions may be more balanced from both a policy and legal perspective. So I would really appreciate if you could elaborate on your plans regarding the WTO dispute settlement reform. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Lee. Another difficult questions, but Dr. Ngozi, please understand that these tough questions are only possible because we love WTO. We have great faith in WTO. Can I answer some of the answers for these questions?
Well, thank you very much. I actually thought I was going to come and hear some solutions from not only the businesses, but the audience, and have a dialogue. I hope I can still elicit some. But let me have a crack and a comment. They're all very good comments and very good questions. You know, from the business side, there is no doubt that they cross the geopolitical tensions between some of our major members do lead to uncertainties for business. And some of the policies that have been recently pursued or measures that have been put in place help to increase that uncertainty. What we have said is that, look, if the objective is to facilitate the movement towards net zero by 2050, to green the economy, WTO rules are not against that. We're actually very supportive. Climate change is an existential threat to all of us. And everything we can do to decarbonize is welcome. However, the issue is how. And we do think that there are ways and means of pursuing these policies that do not discriminate against others. And that's what we're urging. Are there ways that if we want to give subsidies, after all, good subsidies are somehow recognized at the WTO. You have the green box subsidies that don't focus on one particular product, but help perhaps with research and development, with building capacity. There are ways to subsidize without directly discriminating. So what we are urging is how can we look at those kinds of methodologies to achieve the objectives we want. We think that it's up to countries to determine their national security requirements. We cannot do it. I cannot say that the WTO. But what does that mean? Can this be done in a way that does not go against the rules of the game that have been agreed? And if it cannot, should we be thinking of reforming those rules of the game to conform with the 21st century realities that we are facing? So there's no doubt that some of the challenges we are facing today that were not there in the past mean we need to look at some of the agreements we made in the past and see whether they are still fit for purpose. Is the subsidies and countervailing measures agreement still fit for purpose? At the time it was made, China was not yet a member of the WTO. Do we need to relook at some of these agreements? Why must they be so cast in stone? So I'm also coming into the WTO and asking these questions, and I think it's part of the reform for the 21st century that we should be bold enough and courageous enough to do. That being said, when we look at what I said about reglobalization, even before the talk about deglobalization, businesses had been making decisions, business decisions, in a very sensible and smart way. After all, those who are invested in China had begun to see that the costs of production were getting higher, labor costs were getting higher, and therefore they were beginning to look for alternative places on which to base. And they were nearshoring, movement to Vietnam. I just came from Vietnam. And the number of companies, including even Korean companies, that are looking into investing there in order to continue to reap the benefits of cheaper labor and higher productivity. So in the same way, as we look at what are those sectors that are where there's over-concentration in a particular geography, I think making sensible business decisions, the way that businesses would normally do it, the way you would de-risk your business, the way you would try to build resilience, if we allow businesses to make these decisions, I think they will make sensible decisions. I think the issue is if we incentivize them to make decisions that they would otherwise not make by giving subsidies or regulations that force them to do one thing or the other, that's where the problem comes. So I would say to you in SK, and sorry I did not mention certain businesses, that you should do the sensible business-like thing if you want to avoid uncertainty. Some of you have already been making such decisions, and we see it. Morocco, for instance, is getting part of the aviation supply chain, and this was happening before the crisis. So how did that happen? I mean, some decision must have been made by those in the aviation industry. This is an efficient, effective, and profitable way to have the supply chain located. So that is what I would say, that in this crossfire, I think you should keep to the steady road of making sensible business decisions, because I think, based on the environment you see, because I think that is what will solve the problem at the end of the day. From the viewpoint of the WTO, it is the members who talk to each other to decide what happens. What we can do is to continue to point at those areas where care needs to be taken in the decisions made, not to undermine the very tenets that were set up by the members themselves in terms of WTO rules. I hope that some of the complaints you have will be transmitted to your ambassador, who is here, Ambassador Yoon, who is very effective, because we do have a forum in which members can bring up complaints they have about each other's processes. And this is one of the few places in the world you have that. You're able to put your complaints forward, and they're discussed by members and made visible. It may not be that a solution will come immediately, but at least surfacing and having the ability to discuss the problems helps a little bit. You talked about the dispute. Let me respond to the issue on carbon measures and the issues about steel. Well, you know, the problems with steel overcapacity and overproduction have been going on for some time. But I think the very interesting thing you talked about was the new challenges with decarbonization. And I know the steel industry is focusing on green steel. But in the meantime, the complaint we had is that there are so many different standards for measuring the amount of carbon involved in steel. So how do you respond if standards differ from one country to the other? And this is why we got together the forum with the steel industry to try and see how we can be helpful in terms of standards for approaching this. So we are working on this problem, and we are also working in parallel on a methodology for pricing carbon, which we hope will be global. If we have a global approach to pricing carbon, and as an economist, I can tell you that I firmly believe that if we don't adopt a carbon pricing mechanism, it will be slower to deal with this issue of decarbonization. It's one of the tools we need. But each country adopting its own doesn't help. We have the CBAM. You know, we have 70 fragmented carbon pricing and taxing mechanisms in the world today. How does a business deal with that? It makes it very difficult, especially if you're from developing countries or if you're a small and medium enterprise, to deal with these approaches. So what we and other international institutions are advocating and working on is a global framework for carbon pricing that takes into account the need to get to 1.5 degrees, what was agreed in the Paris Agreement. It takes into account some of the issues of common but differentiated responsibilities, meaning that if you're a low-income, low-emitting country, why do you face the same carbon price as a high-income, high-emitter? So we are trying to develop a global methodology, even if you have your own system, regulatory systems, because the US, for instance, will never adopt carbon pricing, but they use regulations, they use incentives. We can measure the equivalency of that against this framework to determine what the carbon price should be. So these are some of the ways we might be able to help. If the world had a common methodology, then some of the issues that you're referring to would not arise. So we are working on it very hard. We talked about this a little bit at the G7 meeting. The IMF is working on it, and Kristalina Georgieva presented the approach. We are working on it at the WTO, so is the OECD and the World Bank. So we've all decided to get together and talk to each other to see if we can come up with a common approach supported by the international institutions. So that's one area we can try to do something, and we are trying to do that. We are also looking towards, can we get members indeed to try to think about a new agreement, a new multilateral agreement on environmental issues. There was once an agreement on environmental goods and services that was being negotiated. It was shelved in 2016 when it seemed like it was going to favor one country or one member too much. I hope we can revive something with maybe less ambitious list of goods. The dispute settlement system. The dispute settlement system, the first level, it's a two-tier system. The first level is functioning. In fact, the panel has more than 20 cases before it now. Many people don't know that it's still functioning because the system is described as dysfunctional, but there's actually a level. It's the second tier where we have criticisms from the Americans, and I must say that some of those criticisms are valid. So the issue is not that there are criticisms. The issue is, why don't we reform the system and take care of those criticisms? That's what we are pushing to do now. And I'm happy to say that the US has gotten more involved, has been working with other members in an informal way to think about what possible, all the issues, possible issues there are, and put those on the table. And then begin to search for solutions. But that process has been informal, and what we are seeking is to formalize it and to actually get proposals on the table about what reform might look like, so that you can begin to have text that you might be able to negotiate. We are hoping that, well, in MC12, an agreement was reached by all members that the system should be reformed by 2024. And we're actually hoping that by February 2024, we'll be at a place, if not a complete reform of the system, but that we would have moved considerably towards that system. Now, to get it, I haven't seen business putting the kind of pressure they need to put. Business has to work hard to also push members, push your countries and your governments to move towards reforming this system. You have to put your lobby to do that. So it's members that have to do this work, and I hope that Korea has shown some leadership in trying to help us move forward. And that's why we are saying countries that can help move this reform forward should do that. But I'm hopeful that we'll be able to get somewhere by MC13. And I think that will send a strong signal that the WTO is reforming and is willing to be part of the 21st century. The unprecedented success we had at MC12, it was not expected. And Korea played a strong role. Because when I came there, I said, we are not going to take no for an answer. We will no longer have the failures of the past define the WTO. And if I had listened to the issue of we won't be able to do it, we've not been successful in the past few years, we would not be there. So we pushed really hard for members to come to some agreements, and we were more successful. And credit has to be given to members. We got an agreement, the Fisheries Subsidies Agreement, the first agreement on sustainability that the WTO has ever done, delivered SDG 14.6. And that had been under negotiation for 22 years. We finally got it done last year. So I'm similarly hopeful that all the other things that are in the works, we will be able to make a move on them. So let me stop there and say that I end by telling you that the WTO is changing and we're very hopeful. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Director General, for frank and very kind answer. You know, about the dispute settlement, all we want is WTO to be a fair and balanced referee whenever there is any conflict. And I think it's a good news that we are going to have some kind of change from here. I know my panelists has a lot of questions to ask more, but we have to move on. So I'd like to share one or two questions from the floor. If you raise your hand, no more questions? Okay. Ambassador from Chile. Matthias.
He's one of our best ambassadors.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Yes. Thank you very much, Dr. Ngozi. Nice to see you again here in Korea. After a year, I think I left Geneva in early July, so nice to see you again. Nice to see you in the news, always doing things for the world trading system and what's going on. I think congratulations on that. As my friend, Mr. Kim, you also forgot to mention first investment facilitation, investment facilitation, yes, of course. And second, you forgot to mention the free trade agreement between Korea and Chile. And that was the first free trade agreement signed by Korea. So it was the first step that Korea took in order to open the economy. And we are celebrating this year 20 years of that free trade agreement. So it's a very important milestone both for Korea and for Chile. I don't have a specific question. Actually, you asked for solutions. I don't have, because I don't work in the private sector. But since you are here in KCCI, I mean, the head of the business community in Korea, and I think this is something that we discussed when I was in Geneva, the role of the private sector in all this, how the private sector can work, can help to build this new world, this new vision of free trade, of inclusive trade, of sustainable trade, of new rules, of new dispute settlement. How can KCCI in this case, and the business community, because the business community in Korea, of course, is bigger than KCCI, also thinking about women-owned business, about SMEs and other communities here. Thank you, Dr. Ngozi.
Well, thank you very much. You know, I've been challenging the business community because they want the WTO to do so many things, but I tell them I don't hear you speaking up for the WTO when things are working well. Before I come to your point, I just want to mention we have one of the best agreements. It's called the IT, Information Technology Agreement, that is so beneficial to the semiconductor industry. They love it. The association came to visit me and they want a third ITA. What does it do? It removes tariffs on a whole range of products that are used to manufacture electrical goods, electronics, computers, and this makes it easier all around the world. It's saving trillions of dollars in what would have been cost for that industry. But I don't hear them singing our praises anywhere. And most people don't even know. So I want to challenge the business community. If you know you want the WTO to work for you, you also have to work for the WTO. You have to be an ambassador for the good things that are happening there. And you have to lobby for the things that you want changed. So the business community, in my view, has a strong role to play. And I've been saying this in Europe, in the US, I'll say it here in Korea, that we should speak up more. I've just set up an advisory committee of business with international chambers of commerce involved so I can hear the voice of the business community more. And I believe that small and medium enterprises, Matthias, you're absolutely right. They are the backbone of every economy. They create the most jobs. We have a group of members at the WTO visibly working on how to help SMEs. What kinds of rules can we make that will benefit SMEs? What type of supply-side interventions can we do? Sometimes they want knowledge to access markets. Sometimes they need, especially women-owned businesses, advice to upgrade the quality of their products, capacity building, and we're trying to do all of that. But big business can also help because small businesses are part of your supply chain. So we can work together to help to solve some of the problems of SMEs and be more inclusive. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do you want one more questions? Please.
Thank you for giving me an opportunity. I'm Bominko, a trade professor in Incheon National University. I came here with some of my students, and we feel very honored to see you today. I have one question and one suggestion. First, what specifically does the WTO expect Korea when it comes to the progress of discussion in trade and gender? As an open and developed country, what can Korea newly achieve in the specific topics within trade and gender? And regarding the annual WTO Trade and Gender Workshop, since last year, as far as I know, only the government officials are invited to the workshop. So I would like to suggest that the WTO could open more workshop materials to the public via the website, or allow civilian researchers like us to participate. Thank you for listening.
I'd like to have one more hand from the back. The gentleman from the back. You showed a very strong hand, so I couldn't refuse. Please. Very short. Please state your name and short question, please.
Okay, thank you very much. It's an honor to be here. My name is Declan. I'm from Nigeria. So, Madam, I have always looked forward to meeting you, so this is a great privilege. So my question is this. You mentioned that re-globalization will not happen without a strong multilateral trading system. And recently we have seen the growth of different trading blocks. So especially like recently the BRICS has been very, very popular, and they have been very close to making several agreements. So in the face of this fragmentation, the regional trading blocks, do you consider it to be a threat to the WTO, to the multilateral system, and also what is the WTO's reaction to this? And my second question is, you say that countries that are at the margins of globalization need to be integrated, into the multilateral system. And I believe that will require structural, political, and economic changes in these countries. So how will WTO help these countries to achieve those changes? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thank you for the excellent questions. On the issue of the trade and gender, this is an area that I'm particularly really interested in. How do we integrate women more into regional and global value chains? That's what we're trying to look at. And we can do it in two ways. First, we have to look at our rules. We're a rule-making organization. And the agreements that we make, do we make sure that the gender concerns are integrated in the way we make those rules? This has not been the case in the past. In fact, bilateral agreements and some regional agreements are far ahead in terms of innovation on the gender front. And so we like to learn from them to bring this into the multilateral rulemaking. We have done the Services Domestic Regulation Agreement, agreement on services, which is a plurilateral. By the way, I totally agree we need plurilateral instruments. And that's the first one in which there's a provision on gender to make sure that women are not in any way discriminated against in the delivery of these services. So we're very proud that we've started. So that's on the rulemaking side. On the supply side interventions, women often face multiple challenges that keep them from participating in regional and global value chains. Some of them is access to information. Some have to do, as I said earlier, with the quality of their products cannot meet the standards required, either for SPS or TBT reasons, sanitary and phytosanitary issues that they need to overcome, capacity building issues, etc. So there, we have the International Trade Center, which is 50% owned by the WTO and 50% by UNCTAD, that does supply-side interventions. We also have some funds that work on these issues. And we are working with women all over the world in developing countries to try and help. In my own country, Nigeria, I saw the impact of this work. a group of women producing shea butter in one of our states, or your state, were helped by the ITC and the WTO over a period of years, so that the shea butter, which is used in many of the skincare products that you use here in Korea, in Japan, and everywhere, they could meet the quality standards to penetrate the European and US market, from which they were barred. And after working with them to meet those sanitary and phytosanitary requirements, they were able to meet the market. And I had a tube of the cream, which says it's made in Milan. You know, it's a skin cream. It says made from Nigerian shea butter. And those women have increased their income 3 times. So those are the kinds of direct supply side interventions that we can do. Now, you asked a question about opening up our trade and gender hub event. I will ask, I have my gender advisor, Nicole, do you want to respond to that about how to invite others in? Do you have a microphone? Can somebody give her a microphone?
Okay.
Thank you. Just to say that we will get your contact information and then let you know. It's pretty open in terms of for researchers, for professors, those who are in the field. So we'll definitely see how we can have more people join the hub as well. Thank you.
On the issue of the different, there are two issues. We have now these geopolitical tensions that are happening between the 2 major powers, threatening to fragment the world into separate trading blocs. That hasn't happened yet, but there is fear it might happen. And we have done research, as I said in my speech, to show that fragmentation into separate trading blocs, maybe one bloc with the US, another with China, will be very costly for the world and for business. So it will cost 5% loss in real GDP in the longer term, real global GDP. And this we cannot bear. So fragmentation is really not an option. We might see a little bit of reshoring of some production processes and, you know, locating some in friendly countries. Maybe the US locates more in Mexico and brings some back. But hopefully related to certain narrow sectors only and not across the board. Because if it goes beyond that, then we'll have real fragmentation. But we are pointing out the cause. The IMF is doing the same, and I think the realization is dawning that this is not the way that it will be beneficial to the world to go. So that's the big fragmentation. What you're talking about instead is, I think, also different groups making regional agreements among themselves, you know, to lower barriers to trade among them. So like Africa, we have the African Continental Free Trade Area. Those types of agreements are not, we are not concerned about them. We have dozens and hundreds of them going on all over the world. Their rules are actually built on WTO rules and norms. So we don't mind them. We don't think they're a threat. We need them to be notified to the WTO. We need to make sure they don't discriminate within that bloc too much against others. And that is all that is required. You know, so if the BRICS decide to get together and form some kind of regional trade agreement amongst themselves or free trade agreement, that's fine as long as it meets the requirements of not harming or discriminating against others. So that's what I have to say, and we have records of all of these RTAs. And you asked how to help countries integrate. Now, it's not the WTO that will help countries. We are happy to build capacity and give advice, but we ourselves have to take it on ourselves. If you want business to locate in your country so that, you know, you can have the investment, you have to compete. You have to have a business-friendly environment, meaning you need to make sure you have a steady macroeconomic environment, your rules are clear, you don't have too many bureaucratic barriers in the face of business, too many requirements. So that is homework that countries have to do for themselves if they want to be attractive to business. The WTO is willing to help on the trade side with capacity building and advice, but the country must enact policies that are friendly. It must do its own reform in order to make itself ready. And that's what I say to many countries on the African continent. Some are doing the reforms and are ready to receive. Others need to do much more work, but they have to do it because they have to compete with the rest of the world.
Maybe some applause. Thank you, Dr. Ngozi. Now the time has run out, and it seems that we need to wrap up because Dr. Ngozi has a very busy schedule today, and I'd like to again express my sincere gratitude to Madam Director General for her frank and constructive answers. This has been a lifetime experience for me to talk with Director General herself, and I think you feel the same way. Please give a big applause for Dr. Ngozi. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. To commemorate today's forum, we will have a photo opportunity. Now this wraps up today's forum. Thank you very much.